Then take the horse and leave the pity, the widow said when the old cowboy laid $20 on the auction barrel. I can survive hunger. I won't survive a man pretending he saved me. The square went quiet except for the flap of the canvas awning and the dry rattle of mesquite leaves against the church fence. Dust hung in the August heat like old flour. A baby fussed somewhere near the mercantile. A mule stamped and snorted. Every eye in Dry Hollow stayed on Ada Mercer, on the coil of reins in her fist, and on the bay mare beside her, the last animal she owned, the last thing her husband had trained with his own hands. The cowboy didn't touch the reins right away. He stood lean and weather-cut in a sun-bleached coat, with a gray beard that looked as if the wind itself had carved it there. Sweat darkened the band of his hat. He had the stillness of a man who had spent half a lifetime waiting out storms without moving. His fingers rested on the auction barrel, close to the money, but his gaze stayed on Ada. I'm not asking for thanks, he said. Good, Ada replied. Because you won't get it. A few men at the back chuckled under their breath, then stopped when she turned on them. She was smaller than most of them, but grief had burned the softness clean out of her. Her black dress clung damp between her shoulders. A strand of dark hair had come loose from its pins and stuck to her cheek. She shoved it back with the same hand that had once loaded hay, set fence posts, and pressed a rag against Jonah Mercer's chest while his blood soaked through both. Harlan Pike leaned against the hitch rail near the saloon, polished boots clean despite the dust. His watch chain glinted when he smiled. It was the smile Ada hated most in the world, because it never reached his eyes and never arrived without a calculation inside it. Best take the offer, Mrs. Mercer, Pike called. Taxes are due by sundown. Sentiment won't satisfy the bank. The mare flicked an ear at Ada's voice and nudged her sleeve, smelling salt and sweat, and the last crust of apple she had tucked into her pocket for this moment. Ada swallowed hard and kept her chin level. She had already sold her saddle, her second plow, her wedding silver, and half the winter flour. The drought had taken the creek first, then the grass, then her pride in careful, exact pieces. The bank was only here for what remained. She forced her hand open and let the reins slide toward the cowboy. He took them at last, slow, almost respectful, as though he knew he was taking more than leather. The mare shifted, hooves grinding in the dirt. The smell of horse sweat and sun-baked hide rose sharp between them. What's your name? Ada asked. Elias Rourke. The name meant nothing at first. Then something cold moved under her ribs. Jonah had once mentioned an Elias on a cattle drive south of Tucson, years before the ranch, before marriage, before Dry Hollow. Just a passing story, hardly more than a name traded over coffee. Still, it struck her like a splinter working loose. Pike pushed away from the hitch rail. Well, Rourke, you bought yourself a skinny mare and a poor bargain. Hope you enjoy both. Elias turned his head just enough to glance at him. Seems to trouble you more than it does me. The men nearest Pike shifted. Ada noticed it. So did Pike. For one moment, the heat itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Elias picked up the $20 and placed it in Ada's palm. His hand was rough, scarred across the knuckles. Pay the taxes, he said quietly. She stared at the coins and crumpled bills. I told you I don't need charity. This ain't charity. Then what is it? He moved closer, low enough that Pike and the others had to strain to hear. Time. She looked up. For what? His eyes were pale and tired and watchful in a way that unsettled her more than kindness would have. For me to keep a promise. Ada's fingers closed around the money before she could stop them. The words hit harder than the heat. I never asked you for one. No, Elias said. Your husband did. The square disappeared for a second. The buzzing flies, the creak of wagon wheels, Pike's polished boots, the mare's shifting flank. Everything narrowed to that one sentence. Pike laughed too quickly. Dead men ask for many things, usually through widows. Ada wheeled toward him, but Elias stepped between them without flourish, one quiet motion that blocked Pike's view of her completely. Not protective, not possessive, just final. Go pay your taxes, Elias said without looking back. And don't pack a wagon yet. She hated that he sounded certain. She hated more that part of her wanted to believe him. By late afternoon, the bank clerk had counted her money twice, disappointed to find it real. By sundown, the tax receipt lay folded in Ada's pocket like a paper shield. The sky over Dry Hollow had turned the color of old copper. Wind came in hot from the flats, carrying dust, horse dung, and the distant smell of someone's supper burning in a cast-iron pan. When she reached her ranch, the yard was empty. No mare, no cowboy, only the house, the lean barn, the broken windmill, and the silence that always thickened near dark. Jonah's hammer still hung by the shed door where he had left it the week before he died. Ada looked at it every evening and never touched it. She went inside, lit the lamp, and set the tax receipt beside the cold stove. Then she pulled the shotgun from behind the flour bin and laid it across the table. If Elias Rourke had lied, she would know before moonrise. The knock came after full dark. 3 slow hits on the door, not loud, not fearful either. The kind of knock a man used when he expected an answer. Ada opened it with the shotgun in both hands. Elias stood on the porch, hat in hand, dust on his shoulders. Beside him, tied to the post, was the bay mare. "I said I bought time," he murmured. "Not your horse." Ada didn't lower the gun. "Why?" Instead of answering, he reached inside his coat and drew out a leather ledger, dark with age, one corner stained almost black. He held it where the lamplight could touch the front. Branded into the cover was Jonah Mercer's cattle mark. Ada's breath stopped. From the road behind the house came the sudden thunder of hooves. Elias looked past her into the dark and said, "Because Harlan Pike just realized I took this from him." The first shot struck the porch post and blew a splinter across Ada's cheek. She jerked sideways, dragging Elias through the doorway by his coat while the mare screamed outside, and the second bullet cracked through the dark. The lamp flame shuddered. Elias slammed the door with his shoulder, shoved the iron latch down, and stood bent for one sharp breath, listening. Hooves circled the yard. "Backroom," he said. Ada did not move. She wiped blood and splintered dust from her cheek with the heel of her hand and leveled the shotgun at his chest instead. "You use my husband's name, ride trouble to my house, and expect me to trust you?" He looked from the gun to her face. "No." "Then start talking." Another shot hit the wall, lower this time, sending plaster grit onto the floorboards. The house smelled of lamp oil, old pine, and the hot metallic scent of fear. Outside, a man laughed. Another cursed at the mare. Ada's fingers tightened on the stock until the wood pressed half-moons into her skin. Elias set Jonah's ledger on the table. He did it carefully, like placing down a body. "I rode with the posse the night your husband died." The room seemed to tilt. Ada's jaw locked so hard it hurt. "Get out." "I never fired." "Get out." "I should have stopped it." The words came flat, not begging, not clean either. They only sounded tired. Worse than tired. Like something carried too long. Ada stepped closer until the shotgun barrel touched his ribs. "My husband went out to meet the sheriff because he thought the law still meant something. He came back slung over a saddle with half his chest ruined. If you were there, you are no better than the man who pulled the trigger." Outside, Pike's voice cut through the wind. "Mrs. Mercer, that man stole private property and wrote it here. Hand over the ledger, and nobody needs to lose more than a door." Ada's eyes never left Elias. "Why now?" He swallowed once. "Because I've spent 8 years drinking instead of answering that question." The honesty of it struck harder than denial might have. Another bullet punched the window frame. Ada flinched. Elias moved at last, swift despite the stiffness in his shoulders, and knocked the lamp onto the floor before the glass could catch a shot. Darkness flooded the room except for moonlight leaking through cracks in the boards. "Curse me later," he whispered. "Live first." He grabbed the table, tipped it on its side, and pulled her behind it just as a third shot shattered the front pane. Cold night air rushed in with the smell of dust and mesquite smoke. Ada hit the floor hard enough to jar her teeth. Elias slid the ledger beneath her skirt hem to hide its shape, and drew a revolver so worn the grips had gone pale. "You come prepared for every widow in Arizona?" she hissed. "No," he said. "Only the one I wronged." Pike called again from the yard, voice smooth as fresh oil. "Ada, listen carefully. The bank will forgive what you owe if you open that door. Harboring a thief is a worse mistake than widowhood." Even in the dark, Ada felt heat flash through her veins. Widowhood, as if it were some foolishness she had chosen. She rose to one knee, ignored Elias's hand trying to stop her, and called back, "If you want my door, Harlan, come take it with your own hands." Silence met that for half a breath. Then the men outside muttered. One horse sidestepped, iron ringing off a stone. Pike did not answer immediately, and that told Ada more than words would have. He wanted the ledger without witnesses, without noise, without town talk by morning. Elias leaned close. There's a root cellar under the pantry hatch. How do you know that? Jonah showed me when he built it. The hurt of hearing that nearly broke her concentration. Still, he had named the hidden latch no stranger would know. Ada backed toward the pantry, keeping the shotgun trained on the front. Elias covered the side window. Together, moving with the sour, unwanted rhythm of necessity, they lifted the hatch and dropped into earth-smelling dark. The cellar was little more than a pit shored with cedar planks. Potatoes had long since shriveled in their bins. A crock shelf lined one wall. Ada crouched below the floorboards while boot steps thudded overhead. Through gaps between planks, she saw a lantern light swinging, heard the door splinter inward, heard Pike's polished calm harden into anger. They were just here. Ain't no horse in the yard now, one rider muttered. Ada looked at Elias. The mare. He gave a faint nod. I slapped her loose. Smart animal. The thought of the bay running blind into cactus and arroyo made Ada's chest tighten. She hated that the worry felt like relief. She hated more that Elias had thought of it before she had. Above them, drawers crashed open. Crockery shattered. Pike walked the room with that measured pace of his. Not hurried, not uncertain, as if every board in her house already belonged to him. Then his boots stopped directly overhead. You can hide tonight, he said to the empty room, voice low now. But at sunrise I bring the deed, the sheriff, and every man in this valley who knows drought makes honest people practical. One ledger won't change that. His boots moved again. A moment later the riders withdrew. Hooves faded down the road. Neither Ada nor Elias spoke until the night had gone deep and still. When they climbed out, the house looked ransacked by wolves. Flour whitened the floor. Jonah's chair had been kicked on its side. The door hung crooked from one hinge. Moonlight poured through the broken window and laid a pale blade across the ledger on the table. Ada lifted it with careful hands. Inside were numbers, cattle tallies, freight marks, water rights, and names. Some names were crossed out. Beside Jonah Mercer's was a single word written in Pike's clipped hand. Witness. Ada stared until the letters blurred. Elias set his revolver down. Jonah found out Pike had been diverting spring water off the North Draw and billing the town for drought losses that never should have happened. He meant to expose him. And you helped kill him. The old man's face tightened. I helped ride him into a trap. The difference did not comfort her. Yet the ledger in her hands was real, the danger outside realer. If she turned Elias away now, Pike would crush them both before noon. If she kept him, she sheltered part of the lie that had buried Jonah. She closed the ledger. At dawn, she said, every word scraped raw. You tell me everything. Until then, you work for the roof you broke bringing this here. His brow moved, almost surprise. Ada handed him Jonah's hammer. We brace the door. Then we saddle whatever future you promised, because Harlan Pike comes back with law or thieves, and I won't meet him kneeling. Far off in the dark, somewhere beyond the windmill, the bay mare whinnied. And from the road below the rise came the faint clink of many harness rings, as if half the valley were already on its way. Dawn came ugly. No birdsong, no dew. Only a hard white sky over dry hollow and heat rising early from the yard in shivering waves. Ada had not slept. She had nailed boards across the busted window, brewed coffee black enough to strip paint, and listened while Elias told the story he should have told 8 years earlier. Jonah Mercer had found the hidden spring beneath the North Draw during the second drought summer. Pike had been siphoning that water at night into holding trenches on leased land, then selling beef high while neighboring ranches dried to bone. Jonah had gathered proof. He trusted the sheriff. The sheriff trusted Pike's money. Elias, hired as extra trail muscle, rode with the men sent to question Jonah. By the time he understood the lie, the ravine had turned red and Jonah was on his knees, trying to breathe through a hole in his chest. What did my husband say? Ada asked. Elias stared into his cup as though it held judgment at the bottom. He said, Tell Ada the water is under the cottonwoods. Not the rocks. The cottonwoods. Then he told me if I had one clean thing left in me, I'd keep you off your knees. Ada stood so abruptly her chair scraped backward. Her hands shook. Not with weakness. With the effort of not putting the coffee pot through the wall. You waited 8 years. Yes. Why? Cowardice, he said. Then shame. Then whiskey. They take turns wearing different hats, but it's the same man underneath. Before she could answer, a bell began clanging from town. 3 fast strikes, then 3 more. Trouble bell. Ada went to the porch. On the far road a dust cloud rolled toward the ranch, thick and deliberate. Sun flashed on rifle barrels. At least 7 riders. Pike was not waiting for sunrise paperwork after all. Lawful enough for you? Elias asked behind her. She turned. Can you still shoot? Straight enough. Then quit confessing and start earning. That won him the faintest shadow of a smile. It vanished when the first rider broke clear from the dust. Deputy Luis Tull rode ahead of the others, young face rigid beneath his hat brim, a paper in his hand. Pike followed beside him, coat neat, expression almost bored. Ada met them in the yard with the shotgun. Elias came out slower, revolver low at his thigh. Heat licked through the soles of their boots. The smell of dust, horse sweat, and old boards carried the warning before the words did. Luis cleared his throat. Mrs. Mercer, I got a court order here for seizure of property pending investigation into stolen records and harboring a fugitive. You read that yourself? Ada called. Or did Pike read it for you? The deputy flushed. Pike's eyes cooled. Enough, Pike said. Hand over the ledger and the old man, and I may still leave you the house. Ada laughed once. It came sharp as a snapped wire. You burned my widowhood into every ledger in town, Harlan, and now you want gratitude because you haven't taken the porch yet. Pike lifted his chin. I want what is mine. Elias spoke for the first time. Nothing in that book is yours except the handwriting. Something changed then. Pike no longer looked amused. He looked cornered. Take them, he said. The world burst at once. Luis shouted no, but Pike's hired men were already moving. Ada fired first. The shotgun blast boomed across the yard and knocked one rider half out of the saddle. Elias shot the lantern hanging from the lead wagon instead of the man driving it. Glass and flame exploded. The team screamed, reared, and tore sideways into the fence. Posts snapped like dry bones. Ada ran, not away, toward the barn. Inside, under the feed bin, Jonah had kept 2 saddle carbines wrapped in oiled cloth. Her father had taught her long ago, when brute force comes in daylight, make it regret standing so clear. She reached the bin just as bullets punched through the barn wall, filling the air with splinters and the hot stink of fresh pine. Outside, Elias cursed. Horses thrashed. Men yelled over one another. Ada came up with a carbine in each hand and tossed one through the doorway without looking. Elias caught it clean. Still earning? She shouted. Still trying. They fired from opposite sides of the barn, forcing Pike's men to scatter behind troughs and wagon wheels. The young deputy had dismounted and dragged the wounded rider clear. He did not raise his own gun. Ada saw it and stored it away. Then smoke reached her. Not gun smoke. Thicker. Dirtier. She spun. The rear of the barn was burning. One of Pike's men had circled wide and thrown a torch through the hay. Flames licked up the dry wall greedily, orange in the harsh day. Heat shoved at her back. Jonah's tools hung in silhouette for one impossible second before blackening began. Ada, Elias shouted. She knew the choice at once. Stay and save the hidden cartridges, the feed, the roof, the last pieces of a life. Or leave the barn and keep breathing. Then she heard the mare. The bay had returned in the night and been tied in the shaded lean-to. Now she shrilled in terror, hooves battering wood. Ada dropped low and ran through smoke. The heat slammed into her face hard enough to make her eyes pour. Hay crackled. A beam spat sparks down her sleeve. She found the mare wild-eyed against the halter ring, cutting herself bloody in panic. Ada cursed softly, sawed through the rope with the belt knife at her hip, and slapped the animal hard on the flank. Go! The mare bolted through a curtain of smoke and daylight. A shape loomed in the flames behind Ada. Elias, coat over his mouth, one arm shielding his face. He grabbed her wrist and dragged her clear an instant before the roof edge collapsed where she had stood. They hit the dirt together as the barn roared up in a tower of sparks. For a heartbeat, they lay side by side, choking. Then Pike's voice rang out from near the well. Enough. Throw the ledger here, or I put a bullet through the old man's skull. Ada rolled onto one elbow. 2 of Pike's men had circled during the fire. Elias had taken one down, but the other now held his rifle jammed against Elias's temple. The old cowboy, half risen, ash streaked across his face, did not plead. Pike stood a few paces beyond, gun steady, coat flecked with cinders. Luis Tull shouted from near the fence. Harlan, stop this. Pike ignored him. Ada felt the ledger against her ribs where she had tied it under her dress. Around them the barn burned, sending smoke into the white sky. Jonah's hammer lay in the yard. The mare stood trembling near the mesquite, reins trailing. Heat pressed from behind, gunmetal glinted ahead, and the whole world narrowed to one terrible decision. Then Pike smiled and said, for everyone to hear, "Tell her the truth, Rourke. Tell the widow whose rope dragged her husband into the ravine." Ada turned to Elias. The ash on his face could not hide the shame in it. And for one sharp, endless second, she no longer knew which man she wanted dead first. Ada did not throw the ledger. She threw Jonah's hammer. Pike saw the movement and jerked his gun toward it by instinct, just enough. Elias drove his elbow backward into the rifleman's throat. Louise Tull fired into the air, yelling for everyone to drop their weapons. The mare bolted between the men in a blast of dust and flying reins. Chaos opened for a heartbeat, and Ada used it. She ran straight at Pike. Not graceful, not careful, the way a storm hits a fence. She slammed into him shoulder first, and they went down in the dirt together. His pistol fired once into the sky. Dust filled Ada's mouth. Pike clawed for her wrist, cursing now, his clean voice finally torn open. She drove her knee into his ribs, ripped free, and rolled as Louise tackled one of the hired men near the trough. "Go!" Elias shouted. Ada did not ask where. She and Elias reached the mare at the same moment. He swung up with a groan that told her the years were collecting interest. Then he hauled her behind him as bullets snapped through the mesquite, and they tore across the north pasture toward the draw. The ride blurred into heat, smoke, and pain. Wind slapped tears from Ada's eyes. The mare's muscles bunched and stretched beneath them, powerful despite fear. Behind them came hoofbeats, fewer now, but fast. Pike had not finished. Elias led them into a wash cut deep by old floodwater and hidden by scrub oak. There, under a shelf of red stone, stood an abandoned line shack Jonah once used during calving season. One wall leaned inward. The roof wore more sky than shingles, but it offered shade, cover, and a place to breathe. Inside, it smelled of dust, mouse droppings, old leather, and the faint mineral damp of stone. Elias slid from the saddle and nearly fell. Ada caught him before she remembered she was angry. Blood had soaked through his shirt high along the ribs. "When?" she demanded. "Barn," he muttered. "You never said. You were occupied." She wanted to strike him. Instead, she tore a strip from her petticoat and pushed him onto the bunk. "Hold still," he hissed when she cleaned the wound with the last of the whiskey from the saddlebag. Outside, the mare cropped nervously at dry grass, lifting her head every few seconds at distant sounds. Pike's riders were still searching. Wind moved through the cottonwoods along the draw with a whisper like skirts over a church floor. Ada packed the wound, wrapped it tight, and sat back on her heels. Sweat cooled on her skin. Smoke from the ruined barn still clung to both of them. "Now tell all of it," she said. Elias stared at the roof for a long time. Then he reached into his coat and drew out a small object wrapped in oilcloth. He placed it in her hand. Jonah's compass. The brass was scratched, one hinge bent, but her thumb knew the worn groove where his nail had always worried it during thought. When she opened the lid, a scrap of paper lay folded beneath the needle. Her breath caught. It was Jonah's handwriting. Quick, slanted, unmistakable. "Ada, if this reaches you by another man's hand, trust the water, not the law. Under the cottonwoods. Live stubborn. J." Her eyes burned. "He gave me that while he was bleeding out," Elias said. "I tied his wrists before I knew Pike meant murder. He could have cursed me. He didn't. He only cared you'd survive." Ada closed her fist around the compass so hard the brass bit her palm. "Then why didn't you come?" "Because I was a weak man with a bottle and a grave in front of him." His voice went ragged. "Because every mile toward you meant seeing what my cowardice made. Because by the time I came sober enough to tell the truth, I no longer believed I deserved to speak it." The shack went still. Outside, a hawk cried once over the draw. Ada looked at him, really looked now. Not the quiet stranger from the auction, not the rider who brought danger, but an old man carrying rot he had allowed to harden inside him. It did not excuse him. Nothing could. Yet she knew something about rot carried too long. Grief had done its own carpentry in her bones. She set the compass on the blanket between them. "I still hate you," she said. A faint, pained smile touched his mouth. "That seems fair. But Harlan Pike killed my husband, burned my barn, and meant to take the land Jonah died protecting. Fairness can wait. Elias let out a slow breath. That sounds like Jonah's widow. She almost smiled and refused to let it happen. Near dusk, hoofbeats passed twice above the draw, then faded. Pike's men were widening their search. The light entering the shack turned from white to amber. Dust motes drifted like tiny sparks in the beam. Ada found an old tin basin, filled it at the trickle spring behind the stone shelf, and when she returned, Elias was sitting up with the compass in hand. He always knew north without it, Elias said. Then why carry it? Because some men keep tools. Some keep promises. Jonah kept reminders. Ada took the compass back and slipped it into her pocket. I'm done being reminded by men. Tomorrow I want proof enough to hang Pike from his own accounts. Elias nodded toward the wall. There's more. Behind the bunk, tucked into a crack in the stone, Jonah had hidden a rolled map. Ada pulled it free with trembling fingers. The parchment showed the north draw, the cottonwood line, and a mark beneath it where underground flow widened into a basin. Beside that, in Jonah's hand, one sentence. Enough water for 3 ranches and the town if managed honest. Not just salvation for her. For Dry Hollow. Ada sat down hard on the dirt floor. All this time Pike had not merely wanted her land. He had wanted to own everyone's thirst. Night settled slowly. Crickets began. The heat loosened its grip. Elias, weaker now, leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. If we bring this to the sheriff, Ada said, Pike buys him. Then don't bring it to one man, Elias answered. Bring it to the whole town where he can't close every mouth at once. She considered that in silence. Outside, the mare snorted softly and nudged at the doorway. Ada rose, stroked the animal's neck, and felt the tremor there easing under her palm. Soot darkened the mare's blaze. Ada wiped it clean with the edge of her sleeve. The gesture was small. It steadied her more than prayer had. When she turned back, Elias was watching her. What? She asked. He shook his head. Mercy isn't obedience. The words hung in the dusk. Ada looked out toward the cottonwoods, black against a bruised sky. She thought of Jonah's blood in the ravine, of Pike's smile, of Louise firing into the air instead of at her, of neighbors who had watched her auction in silence because fear had trained them well. No, she said at last. It isn't. Then, from the ridge above the draw, a lantern flashed 3 times. Not Pike's men. Mrs. Wren's signal from the neighboring homestead. The one she used for fire, flood, or death. Ada grabbed the carbine. Hope had finally come looking for them, which meant danger was close enough to smell. Mrs. Wren brought the town with her. Not all of it, but enough. By first light, the ridge above the north draw held shapes Ada had not expected to see on her side. Mrs. Wren in her sunbonnet with a rifle across her lap. Deputy Louise Tull bruised and grim. The blacksmith Abel Crane carrying a sledgehammer as though the earth itself had offended him. 2 drovers from the freight road, and the schoolteacher, Miss Bell, holding Jonah's map like a court document. Fear had ruled Dry Hollow so long that courage looked awkward on it at first. Louise swung down from his horse and faced Ada with his hat in both hands. I read the order, he said. The judge's signature was forged. Pike pressed me to serve it anyway. That part is on me. Ada studied him. Young, ashamed, trying not to hide either thing. You aiming to fix it? Yes, ma'am. Then stop apologizing and start standing where folks can see you. He nodded once. That was enough. Pike had not wasted the night. From the rise beyond the cottonwoods came the metallic clatter of shovels and wagon chains. He had brought hired men to cut into the draw and open the hidden basin before witnesses could gather. If he controlled the water physically, he could still spin the rest as rumor and widow's spite. Ada mounted the bay mare. The animal tossed its head once, then settled beneath her, warm and solid. Jonah's compass rested in Ada's pocket, the brass heavier now with meaning than metal. Elias, pale but upright, rode at her right with his coat buttoned over the bandage. He looked older than the day before and steadier than the years before that. What happens if he draws first? Louise asked. Ada checked the carbine across her saddle. Then he proves our case faster. They rode out together. The north draw opened between low ridges lined with cottonwoods gone silver green in the morning wind. Beneath them, Pike's men had already torn into the bank with picks and spades. One wagon stood ready with pipe lengths. Another held crates of blasting powder. Pike himself sat on horseback near the center, directing the work as if the land had always answered to his voice. When he saw the group writing down, his smile returned. Thinner now. Meaner. Well, he called. The widow found herself a congregation. Miss Bell raised the ledger high. And you found yourself literate enough to hang. Some of Pike's men glanced at one another. Ada rode forward until only 20 paces separated them. Wind lifted the ends of her black shawl. Behind her, Dry Hollow waited in a silence tight as wire. Harlan Pike, she said, loud enough for the workers, the townspeople, and heaven if it cared. You forged a court order, diverted public water, murdered my husband, burned my barn, and hired men to seize this land by force. Pike laughed. That's a lively speech from a woman with no proof. Ada held up Jonah's map. Then Miss Bell opened the ledger and read names, dates, water tallies, false losses, and payments made to the sheriff. Each word landed like a hammer blow. Abel Crane took a step forward every time a number was spoken, until his shadow touched Pike's horse. Luis drew his badge from his vest and pinned it high where all could see. I'm placing you under arrest pending territorial review. Pike's expression hardened at last. You're placing nothing. He reached for his pistol. So did everyone else. The draw erupted in motion, horses sidestepping, men shouting, leather creaking, birds exploding from the cottonwoods. Ada did not fire first. She kicked the mare left as Pike's shot cracked past her shoulder. Elias fired once and shattered the blasting crate latch on the powder wagon. Abel hurled his sledge into the spokes of Pike's pipe cart. Luis tackled one of the hired rifles before the man could sight down the crowd. Then Ada saw what Jonah had seen. The fresh cuts Pike's men had dug were already damp. Water glimmered under the broken clay. She wheeled the mare toward the trench and shouted, "Dig there, under the roots." Mrs. Wren and the drovers leaped from their saddles with shovels. Pike realized at the same instant. Stop them. He drove his horse straight at Ada. The impact nearly unseated her. Pike grabbed for her arm, trying to drag her down. His face, so carefully civilized in town, had gone red and stripped raw with panic. Ada slammed the carbine stock across his wrist. His pistol fell. He caught her shawl instead and yanked. For one sickening second, she was half out of the saddle, boot twisting. Then Elias came between them. He did not shout. He did not grandstand. He simply rode in low, caught Pike full at the shoulder, and sent both of them crashing into the trench edge. Dirt gave way beneath their weight. The bank split with a cracking groan. Water burst from the earth. It came first as a dark gush, then a shining surge, cold and strong, tearing through the cut bank and flooding the trench in a bright, furious sheet. Men stumbled back cursing. The pipe wagon tipped. One blasting crate slid and soaked instantly. The whole draw changed color as wet earth drank and overflowed. Children in town would have called it a miracle. Ada knew better. It was Jonah, speaking late through stone. Pike clawed for footing in the mud, one hand reaching toward the pistol half buried near the roots. Elias, on one knee, had his own revolver drawn and aimed squarely at Pike's chest. The old cowboy's hand shook, not with fear, with the weight of the years balanced on one trigger. No one moved. Ada dismounted and stepped into the cold runoff, black dress darkening to the knees. She went to Elias and laid her hand over the barrel, pushing it down. He dies easy that way, she said. Pike spat mud and blood. You self-righteous fool. After all this, you'd spare me? Ada looked at him with a steadiness she had not possessed at the auction square. No, I'd sentence you to live long enough to hear every thirsty family in this valley curse your name while they drink from water you tried to steal. Luis and Abel hauled Pike up between them. This time no one obeyed his orders. Two hired men threw down their rifles. Another walked away without his hat. The schoolteacher stood at the water's edge crying openly and making no effort to stop. Elias sagged where he knelt. Ada caught him under the arm. It's done, she whispered. He looked at the spring, at the townspeople, at Pike in chains, and then at her. No, he said softly. It's begun. Weeks later, the barn frame rose again beneath fresh-cut beams. The town and 3 ranches laid a shared ditch from the basin under the cottonwoods, each family working by turn, each bucket of mud carrying the memory of what silence had cost them. Pike was sent east for trial with the ledger, the forged order, and enough witnesses to break even his money. Sheriff Coulter resigned before the papers reached the territory. Ada kept the ranch. More than that, she kept her name on it. Elias stayed through winter in the room Jonah once used for tack, healing slow, mending fences slower, and speaking only when speech earned its keep. No promise could return the dead. Both of them knew that. But some promises, kept late, still changed the shape of the living. In spring, Ada carved a new sign for the gate. Mercer Draw. Shared water by honest measure. Travelers passing the ranch in later years would see cottonwoods shining over the ditch line, hear hammers from the rebuilt barn, and sometimes find an old cowboy on the porch whittling while a widow with steadier eyes than sorrow once allowed walked the fence at dusk. And when evening light turned the water copper beneath the trees, two shadows would stretch side by side across the pasture, long and unhurried, toward a horizon that no longer looked empty.